Hi there, this is DM Nell. And if you are watching this video, you may have seen my introductory video, which was an overview of Shadow of the Demon Lord, and a terrible one at that. So I'm going to try to make this one a little less rambling and a little bit more content oriented. So what I plan to do for this video is to actually go through the table of contents, if I can talk, table of contents for the core rulebook of Shadow of the Demon Lord, which is showing on the screen here. And I'm not going to go through the whole book page by page or anything like that, because I don't think that would be cool. But I am going to, for this video anyway, I'm just going to go through the table of contents and just kind of highlight all the stuff that's in this game. And then in a different video, I will actually go into each one of those chapters and sections, and we'll talk about it. Now, I'm not going to read from the book verbatim or anything like that. That would be boring. But I am going to basically just chat about the awesomeness that's in this book. So this is the introductory page here. It tells you all the credits, the writing and design, Robert J. Schwab, and everybody else involved in this game. There's also the playtest team and some other folks that he had thanked. There is also in the actual physical copy, I don't know if it's in the PDF, in the physical copy of the book, there is there's a list of all the Kickstarter contributors, and my name is in there. Yay! So I'm actually somebody who helped support the design of this thing, or the production of this thing. So here we go. All right, next is what we're actually going to go through for this video. So we have our table of contents, and as you can see, there's just a lot of stuff here. So I'm going to go over this very high level, and in a some other video we'll talk about these things in much more detail, but I may touch on them a little bit just to explain what these are, or what all this stuff is, so that you can at least kind of understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm gonna ignore this first part here. So chapter 1 is character creation. And character creation starts with the section on ancestries. Now, ancestries is another term for what other RPGs call races. So you can see that the ancestries or races that are introduced in the core rulebook are these 5. The human, the changeling, 6. The human, the changeling, the clockwork, the dwarf, the goblin, and the orc. And yes, you can play a goblin and an orc. So let me just kind of go into each one of these just real briefly. So a human is your core human, just like is available in pretty much every other role-playing game. The changeling is actually a fey creature that is a shape changer, and the whole shtick with the changeling is that they can take on different identities that they can see, and actually just become different people. Their actual real appearance is kind of gruesome. They're just made up of they're kind of a homunculus, made up of stones and mud and sticks and leaves and grass and just kind of a bunch of natural crap that's put together in a humanoid shape and animated basically. So that's what they look like normally, but then they can shift into the appearance of pretty much any other living creature, or humanoid creature, I should say. So you actually start off the game when you play a changeling. You start off the game as a changeling, but you are impersonating a different ancestry. So you either start off as a human, or a dwarf, or a goblin, or whatever. But you can change that. basically unlimited amounts of times throughout the course of your campaign. So it's a pretty cool race. The next one is Clockwork. Clockwork is basically an automaton made up of metal shell, gears, kind of like a steampunk clockworky type robot thing, but in a more of a fantasy sense, not so much a science fiction sense. And the whole deal with a clockwork is that it's animated by an actual living soul that was supposed to go to the underworld and be reincarnated like all other living souls are, and I'll talk about that some other time. But for whatever reason, somehow it got trapped in a clockwork body. So it's a living soul inside a machine, and it makes for some interesting role-playing opportunities. The next one is Dwarf, which is your typical dwarf from all other fantasy archetypes. And then we have Goblin. And Goblin is also a Fey creature, but they were actually kicked out of the Fey race, and so now they just live in the world amongst the other humanoids, and they are, they can be played off as comedy relief, but they can also be pretty cool themselves. So the whole thing with goblins is that they are they're disgusting creatures. They wallow in filth and disgusting stuff. And to them, it's just normal living, but to everybody else is grossed out by it. So anyway, lots of opportunity for wackiness there. All right, now we are down to the orc. Now the orc is kind of like orcs from other RPGs, but in this in the setting that this game is in, orcs are actually a slave race. And they're a created race. They're not a natural born race. They were actually created by an order of wizards at the behest of the emperor to create him an army. And so these wizards took these war captives and basically transformed them into orcs. And there's a whole huge long backstory that goes with that. I'm not going to go into right now, but basically the orc is is created to be a soldier, although they can be any of the classes or what is known in this game as a path. But I'll get to that here in a minute. A player character orc isn't necessarily a soldier for the emperor. They are obviously out on their own somehow. So it's a interesting opportunity for the player to come up with a reason as to how and why that happened. All right, next section here, as you can see, is professions. Professions are essentially your job, or the things that you have been doing for a living or learning in your life up to the point where you start adventuring. And I think you start off with 2 professions at the beginning of the game, and then you can pick up some other professions as you go along. But professions are also what are used in the place of a skill system, which is prevalent in things like D&D and other similar games. But Shadow of the Demon Lord doesn't use a skill system. It actually uses your professions to determine whether or not you have aptitude in a particular task that you're trying to accomplish. So I'll get in more into that when we go into detail on professions. All right, that's the next section is your starting equipment, which basically is what your character starts with, and it's pretty interesting how we do it here. You can basically start off your character. You roll it on a table, and there's tons of tables in this game, incidentally, if you're a lover of randomization. But Shadow of the Demon Lord uses starting equipment table to, and you roll on it to determine, how well off you are, which determines how much you start with, equipment-wise. So it goes everywhere from being, destitute to being very well off. And I forget the terms off the top of my head, which are deeper in the book. But basically, there's 5 levels of wealth that you start off at. So you could, basically fall in that range. Every time I've rolled up a character, I usually fall right in the middle. And usually what happens with that is that you get, some very basic starting equipment and a few coins that you can use to buy some other stuff. But if you're like destitute, then you don't really have much more than the clothes on your back. If you're well off, then you can afford, obviously, to buy more. So it's a pretty interesting way to start off the game. And also in this same section is a table called Interesting Things. Interesting Things is a way for you to start the game off with something that is kind of unusual. It doesn't really explain what the thing is other than to just, tell you what it is. It doesn't tell you where it came from, what it does, or anything like that. Basically, it's just a thing that you add to your character that you and your GM can elaborate on as much or as little as you want to. You can make a story out of it, or you can just kind of consider it an oddity and just forget about it. But it is at least something that can be something that would be a potential story asset for you later in the game. All right, the next section talks about role playing, which is your basic, how to role play, and that finishes up chapter 1. So then we go into chapter 2, which is actually playing the game, and the first section of playing the game is, basically going over some of the, very rudimentary aspects of the game, like, how do you make a decision in a role playing game? How do you track time? How does task resolution work? What do your character's attributes mean, and how do they interact with the game? And it also goes over the other characteristics of your character. The next section is the damage section, and the damage section goes into great detail on how a character tracks the damage that they take and what effect that damage has on them. And the interesting thing about this game is that you have what's called your health, which is one of your attributes, and that basically is the maximum. If you want to make a comparison to say Dungeons and Dragons, it would be similar to your hit points. So your health is what you are normally, and it's a static number. It only changes when you level up or when you are impacted by a spell or a monstrous effect or a disease or something that would cause your health to be reduced. You never subtract your damage from your health, though. Damage is actually measured separately. You start tracking your damage at 0 and you count up. And when your damage has gotten to half of your health, halfway to the halfway point of your health, then you are considered to be injured. Those of you who may have played 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, it's very similar to the bloodied condition from 4th edition. There's really not a whole lot of mechanical impact to being injured, but there can be, just depending on what monsters you're fighting and that sort of thing. So, but anyway, if your damage reaches half of your health, then you are injured, and then if it reaches your full health, that's when you fall down and you can't do any more except you make rolls to see if you come back or if you die. So that's the damage section. It also talks about how to heal and how you go about dying. And dying is you don't just take damage up to your health and then die. There's actually a progression based on your die roll. Once you once you fall down and your damage matches your health, matches or exceeds your health, then you start making fate rolls. And fate rolls determines whether or not you get worse or stabilize or get better. All right, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail there because it's a pretty comprehensive system, but I will talk about that at some other time. Afflictions. So afflictions are the various things that can happen to your character that causes your character to be negatively impacted in some way. So, for example, becoming unconscious or becoming impaired or becoming poisoned. Those are all afflictions that can affect your character, being blinded, things like that. There's a whole list of them, and they're mostly bad things. All right, the next section of this chapter is the environment and how you interact with it. So it talks about what objects are, how range and distance are measured in the game, and obscurement, which is a way that determines, or a thing that determines how visible something is, or how not visible something is, which can have an impact on a character or a creature's ability to see them and potentially target them in combat. All right, the next section is role playing. Talks a little bit more about that there. And one thing in particular that is interesting in this section is the fortune system. Fortune is a way for your character to have kind of a free way to make a certain die roll better. So, for example, and again, using D&D as a comparison, it would be similar to the inspiration mechanic in D&D, although it's slightly different in Shadow of the Demon Lord. Kind of the same concept. It's just a way to earn something that you can use at a critical point that will help you with a die roll at when you actually need it. All right, and then there's social interaction, which talks about how you interact with NPCs. There's actually a thing called social combat, which takes the social interaction and kind of puts a framework around it that is similar in terms to combat, to actual physical combat. And it's a interesting way to settle whether a character or an NPC can influence each other and how they influence each other. Now, obviously, those things can just be role played out, and this is not meant to change that, or it's not meant to excuse me, it's not meant to replace that. Role playing is still very highly encouraged in this game, but if you do like to have a little bit more mechanical type of resolution to those types of activities, this is certainly a very good way of doing that. All right, the next section in this chapter goes into combat, and there is a lot of information in the combat section. It talks about the battlefield, which is basically the field of play that your characters are interacting in. How to determine whether your characters are aware of the threats and whether or not they are surprised, and if a surprise round takes place. And then the anatomy of a round is a very, very important part of this section. The reason why it's important is because it talks about the initiative system. The initiative system in Shadow of the Demon Lord is one of the great innovations of this game. Initiative is something that is used in pretty much every role-playing game, and it's very similar in most role-playing games. You usually roll a number, and then when that number comes up during the round, then it's your turn to go. But that's not how it's done in Shadow of the Demon Lord. In Shadow of the Demon Lord, you actually have different parts of a round. So a round is somewhere around 10 seconds long. give or take. It's just an arbitrary, or not an arbitrary, but it's just a number that just basically uh, okay. Well, let's just say it's 10 seconds. So what can you do in that 10 seconds? Well, you can do a lot of things, but they are done at certain points in the round. So the round's anatomy is as such. You have the um, fast turn, the slow turn, and then the end of round. So there are three sections. You could call them phases maybe, but there are three parts of a round. And depending on what you want your character to do that round will largely determine when you get to go in that round. So um, let's say all you want to do is stand there and shoot your bow and arrow. You have no intentions whatsoever of moving. You're just going to stay put and shoot your bow and arrow. If that's all you're going to do, then you're just taking an action that round. If you're just taking an action that round, then you would go on the fast turn, because the fast turn allows you to only take one action or a move. It won't let you do both in the same part of that round, just one or the other, an action or a move. So let's say you just wanted to run that round, or sneak around that round. You had no intentions of doing any type of activity other than moving. Then you would again go on the fast turn. The fast turn always goes first in the round, followed by the slow turn. Now the slow turn is when you can do more. If you want to do more that round, then you wait until the slow turn comes up during the course of that round. Now the slow turn allows you to take a move and also to take an action. So you can do both of those things during that section of the round. The last part of the round is the end of round, and that is basically more of a task resolution part of the round, where if you have some kind of effect that took place and is scheduled to end, it typically will end at this part of the round. So there are three segments of the round: fast turn, slow turn, and end of round. And that's basically it. You decide which one you want to go on based on what you want to do. And then there's no rolling involved. You just go during that round. Now, if, let's say, everybody in your party, your adventuring party, wants to go on the fast turn, great. You guys decide who goes first. It's not anything that's determined by a die roll. It is something that is determined by a group consensus, or whoever just jumps in and says, okay, I'll go first. It also allows you to do some strategizing that way, or actually come up with some tactics to play off of each other. So let's say that the rogue or the thief type character, they're not called that in this game, but actually they are called the rogue. So let's just go with that. The rogue wants to set themselves up to be able to get a little bit more of a advantageous position, and doing so would give them a bonus that round. So they would maybe want to go on the slow turn, whereas you have your archers or your spellcasters or whatnot that are just slinging things at a distance, at a range, and they would want to go on the fast turn. Now the only thing that can be a problem with your character deciding to go on a fast or a slow turn is that even though the player characters always go first, and that is true in this game, player characters always go first. The monsters, unless they get a surprise round on you, the opponents, the NPCs, always go after the NPCs. Or excuse me, the monsters and NPCs always go after the PCs in each section of the round. So in the fast turn, the PCs that are going fast go first, and then any monsters or NPCs that are going fast go after all the fast PCs are gone. And then when the slow turn comes up, all the monsters that and NPCs that are going slow go after the player characters that are going on during the slow turn. So if you are a PC that's going in the slow turn, you're going to wait until the slow turn comes up in the round. It's possible that you could be hit by a monster that is going in the fast turn before you can do anything. So that could be a problem, and it's just part of the decision-making process during this game. That you gotta figure out what's best for your character for that particular round. So anyway, it's a very innovative initiative system. I probably didn't explain it very well, but it really makes for a different kind of way to manage the combat. And like I said before, it really allows for a lot of good interaction with the PCs and strategizing. All right, so that's the anatomy of a round. Then the same section talks about moves, how you move, what type of actions you can take. And the interesting thing is that there's combat is just one type of action. There's all kinds of different actions. And even with combat, there are different types of actions that you can take. And there's actually a sidebar that highlights very specific types of combat actions that you can take. So let's say, for example, you want to target a specific body part on a creature. There's a way to do that, and it's talked about and highlighted in that section. There are 5 or 6 different types of combat actions that you can take. Besides just doing a normal attack. So it's really really gives you a lot your character a lot of different options to do rather than just go up and swing your sword. Okay, so that is the action section, and then making attacks just goes into the mechanics behind doing that. And that wraps up chapter 2. Now chapter 3 goes into the classes, the term used in other RPGs, but the term used in Shadow of the Demon Lord is a path. So your character takes a path, and they start off the game basically, well, just depending on how your GM wants to do it, you can actually start off at 0 level. The game is designed so that you can start off as a nobody. You don't have a path. You're basically a farmer or a merchant or a clerk, whatever your profession is, that's what you are at 0 level. And then when you play through your starting adventure, the actions you take or the opportunities that are presented to you may determine what path you take when you hit the first level of the game. And the first level of the game is a novice path. So novice paths give you 4 different options to choose from, which are basically the core concept for starting off your character. So if your character is a pick up a club and beat something to death, they're probably going to be a warrior. If your character is somebody that nurses other people, takes care of their wounds, tries to help them spiritually, encourages them, they may go down the priestly path. So you have a priest novice path. If your character decides, maybe they are, nimble, maybe they're able to hide really well, maybe they're sneaky, maybe they're good at picking pockets, stealing stuff. Maybe they grew up as a beggar. Who knows? They may lean towards the rogue novice path. And if you have an aptitude with magic, maybe you picked up a magic book and all the words just kind of glowed as you read them and sparked something in your brain that really just caught onto it. Then you would probably take the magician novice path. So all those 4 paths are your core character concept. And that's pretty much all that's detailed in the chapter 3. Now, chapter 4 goes into the next section, which is expert path. And before I go any further into that, let me back up a little bit. Novice paths make up levels 1 and 2 of this game. So you have a first level novice path, and then you progress to the second level of that same novice path when you level up to level 2. And leveling in this game is the whole party levels at the same time. It's not an individual thing. You don't have experience points or anything like that. The GM tells you when you level up, and the whole party levels up at the same time. So you actually have more of a party level than an individual level. But for your novice paths, you have a level 1 and you have a level 2. And then when you level up to level 3, that's when you make a choice in your expert path. Now, your expert path allows you to really take your character either into a more specialized version of your novice path, or it allows you to dabble in other things that may not have anything to do with your novice path. So this is kind of an inherent built-in multi-classing mechanic that is also a great innovation in Shadow of the Demon Lord. So right off the bat, you are able to go from being a magician in levels 1 and 2, and then let's say during those first 2 levels, you basically picked up a sword and you started fighting with it, and you're pretty good at it. So instead of, when you get to your expert path, instead of progressing further along in that magical field and taking a wizard, instead you decide, hey, I'm going to go, I'm pretty good with this sword, I'm going to go into a fighter expert path and see how that goes. So the expert path lasts for levels 3 through 6. So you have basically 4 levels of expert paths, and during that time you get different abilities and different things you can do. Spellcasters get more castings of spells and ranks of spells and that sort of thing. And your character gets better. Some of your attributes gets better. You get more health as you progress. You get a talent every time you level up, or at least something that modifies your character and the things that they can do. So every time you level up, you get something, which is very cool. Okay, so in the expert paths, you have several to choose from. So I'm just going to list these off. I'm not really going to go into a whole lot of detail on these other than just to name them. So you have an artificer expert path, you have an assassin, you have a berserker, you have a cleric, you have a druid, you have a fighter, you have an oracle, you have a paladin, you got a ranger, you got a scout, you got a sorcerer, you got a spellbinder, you got a thief, you got a warlock, you got a witch, and then you got a wizard. And those make up all of your expert paths that are in the core rulebook. Next chapter goes into the next tier of the game, and that is the master path. So when you reach 7th level, you pick your basically the pinnacle of your character's advancement. And there are, as you can see, a lot more master paths than there are expert paths, and there were a lot more expert paths than there were novice paths. So as you progress in levels and progress in tiers, you specialize your character even more, or you can diversify your character even more, however you choose to do it. So maybe, using my earlier example, maybe you were a magician in your novice path, then you went to fighter, but as you were doing all your adventuring from levels 3 through 6, when you hit 7th level, you decide that you are going to go in a totally different direction and become a let's see, what would be a weird thing to go into? Poisoner. Maybe you had a couple of adventures where you got away with poisoning somebody, and you thought, hey, this is what I want to do for my master path. So that's an option for you if you want to really go the weird route, or if you want to just stick to the the natural progression of your novice path, then you would have, your magician to wizard to one of the specializations of the magical traditions. And that could be an arcanist. That's one of the magical traditions, or it could be a chronomancer, or it could be an enchanter, and so on. So again, master paths are just how you really just hone in on your character concept, or really just make something totally new. So that is your master path. So as you can see, just with the path system in this game, you're not playing Dungeons and Dragons anymore. You are playing Shadow of the Demon Lord. There is no other game system that I'm aware that I've played anyway where you create your character in this way, and it's really a great way, in my experience in running this game and watching my players develop their characters, and also I've actually played a campaign, and doing this with my character. It's really an excellent way of character creation, and I really love it. I think it's fantastic, and I think you will too. All right, so I'm already past my 30-minute point that I want to keep these videos at, so I'm going to stop it right there. Next time, I'll pick it up where we left off at Chapter 6, and we will go through the rest of the book and highlight the stuff that is left to highlight. So I want to thank you again for tuning in, and again, I want to apologize for my stream of thought, stream of consciousness style of producing these videos. That's just how I roll, and it's how I'm going to continue to roll. So at any rate, let me go ahead and conclude this video, and I'm going to conclude it in the same way that I hear the creator of this game conclude a lot of his posts on the Google Plus community, and how he does some greetings when I hear him on podcasts, and that is to say, hail.